So thank you, everyone, once again. My name is Donna Long, and I am the VP of People and Culture here at YWCA Dayton. And we thank you to everyone who has joined us today in our first of four conversations in our Mission Move segment. Today, and the Mission Move segment that you are joining is brought to you by the Ohio Climate Justice Fund. And this is our Listen, Lead, Share community listen session. Before we get started, I want to give a little bit of information of who the Climate Justice Fund is and how we were connected. So the Ohio Climate Justice Fund is guided by an advisory board comprised of Ohio environmental advocates and leaders that invest in Black, Indigenous, and people of color organizations in Ohio, working at the intersection of racial justice and climate action. And if you want a little bit more to know a little bit more about the Ohio Climate Justice Fund, there is their website there. Ohio Climate Justice Fund pillars. The OCJ is committed to the Jamez principles for democratic organizing, being inclusive, emphasis on bottom-up organizations, letting people speak for themselves, working together in solidarity and mutuality, building just relationships among ourselves, and committed to self-transformation. What is Listen, Lead, Share? Listen, Lead, Share is a statewide grassroots campaign that includes the goal of hosting public conversations with community members and stakeholders about the best and most effective way to address climate justice, climate and environmental justice in our communities. Why does climate matter? Climate change is defined as a change in the unusual weather found in a place, and we know we are experiencing unusual weather. If anyone else is dialing in today that's not from Ohio, I'm sure you're experiencing your own changes in climate weather patterns, but all those Ohioans, we know that we could add all four seasons in 4 days, but now we're really living in a unique time where it is really exacerbated. But climate change is a change in the unusual weather found in a place. This also includes changes in the Earth's climate and usual temperature. Climate can take much time and years to change. But climate change is not the great equalizer. As climate change gets worse, temperatures will rise the most in poorer countries like Asia, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, despite the fact that North America and Europe are some of the biggest polluters. In the United States, climate change leads to more extreme weather and disasters such as Harvey, such as Katrina, devastating wildfires, and even the extreme cold weather events of 2021. We know that poorer majority BIPOC communities have less infrastructure in place to protect against these events and bear much more of the burden. Pollution, much like wealth, is not distributed equally in the United States. I mentioned earlier that racism is a public health crisis, and environmental justice is a part of that crisis. And today, Black people are nearly 4 times more likely to die from exposure to pollution than white people. Racism is a public health crisis. Systemic racism has long influenced where major sources of population are located within communities. In the early 20th century, white government planners and many municipalities drew redlining maps that identify Black and Latino neighborhoods as undesirable and unworthy of housing loans. Heavy industry was permitted to clutter those places, adding toxic dimensions that persist today. And we ask ourselves the why and the how. Leaning into redlining is most important. Today's topic is titled Squeaky Clean, Defining Clean Energy and the Impacts of Environmental Racism. Now I'd like to introduce you to your moderator for today's topic, Charmaine Webster is an ordained minister, preacher, teacher, and founder of Womanish Projects, a faith-based women's rights 501c3 nonprofit organization focused on Black women and girls. She is known for her out-of-the-box thinking, and we benefit from that at YWCA, engaging speaking style, and love for God and people. She is the visionary behind Day Without Women in Church, and Womanish Projects will host this summer on July the 31st at Levitt Pavilion in Dayton, Ohio. In addition to her ministerial work, Reverend Charmaine is a multi-talented entrepreneur. Yes, she is. She is the CEO of Tiga's Treats, a home bakery specializing in sweet potato pies, a wedding officiant, a premarital counselor, and a consultant focused on family and community engagement, racial justice, and grant writing. Charmaine's clients describe her work as transformational and life-changing. Reverend Charmaine received her bachelor's degree of arts in public policy from Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and a master's of divinity from Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Charmaine is born and raised in Cincinnati, and now we are so blessed that she resides in Dayton, Ohio, with her husband, Benjamin. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the camera over to Charmaine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you so much, YWCA, for inviting me to be the moderator for this panel. I am so excited to be talking about squeaky clean, defining what clean energy is and the impact of environmental racism. We have some amazing panelists here who know what they are talking about. So we're going to let you all know more about them. First, we have Courtney Rutledge. She is a native Daytonian and is a graduate of Jackson State and Georgetown University. Courtney's excellence in public policy has allowed her to serve the executive office of the mayor of Washington, D.C., the U.S. House of Representatives, House Committee on Homeland Security, and the congressional office of Congressman Benny G. Thompson. Solidifying her commitment to equal justice and environmental parity as a paralegal, Courtney currently serves as legal aid of Western Ohio and advocates for basic legal equality. Courtney is also a U.S. EPA Environmental Justice Academy Fellow. We also have Eileen Hull. Recently started her role as the Community Engagement Coordinator for Dayton Energy Collaborative. She is a part of a team working to start an savings program in Twin Towers neighborhood, where Eileen will be heading recruitment and outreach. The program seeks to combine already existing home weatherization and home repair programs to lower cost and carbon footprints while also improving space conditioning and health outcomes. So let's give our panelists a snap, because they're going to help us understand what are we even talking about, right? A lot of people don't know what environmental justice is. They don't know what environmental racism is. They don't know what it means to be clean. And so we're going to hear from our experts today. So so let's start there. What is clean energy and what is environmental racism? And we'll start with Courtney.
Hi, everyone. Forgive me, I was on mute. So sure, we'll start with environmental racism. I guess I'll begin with why does it matter, really? Like what's going on and really what is environmental racism? And so whether we're talking about poison tap water in Flint, Michigan, or toxic waste dumps on reservations, or a town in China where 80% of their children have been poisoned by old computer parts, waste, sewage works, mines, landfill, power stations, major roads, and emitters of airborne particulate matter. All of those are examples of environmental racism, which is a form of systemic racism whereby communities of color are disproportionately burdened with health hazards through policies and practices that enforce them to live in proximity. We live in greater proximity to toxicity. As a result, these communities suffer greater rates of health problems, and because we live with hazard pollutants. So it was African-American civil rights leader, Benjamin Chavis, who coined the term environmental racism in 1982. And notably, the history that excluded people from color talked about that movement, and leadership tackled that, really the leadership of the ecology movements, which is huge when we think about climate, energy, future, as only 30% of African Americans and BIPOC communities are a part of the STEM fields that really give ourselves and lend ourselves to those fields. And so when Benjamin Chavis, he coined that term environmental racism, he talked about notoriously excluding people of color from the movement. At that time, it was only ecology, and now it has transformed into equity. Many of the problems that face low-income communities as a whole, but race has always been found to be most important than socioeconomic status in predicting the location of a nation's hazardous waste facilities. And in 2007, Dr. Richard Robert Bullard, the father of environmental justice, coined that, looking at the proximity to hazard sites and communities of color. And so African-American children today, we know, are 12 times more likely to have lead poisoning from proximity to waste other than our white Caucasian children counterparts, while even Black Americans who are making, in the middle class, $50,000 to $60,000 a year, we are more likely to live in polluted areas than our white counterparts who are only making $10,000. And so today, really, environmental racism matters. And it's important that we define it because it is a moral issue.
And so, Eileen,
Go ahead.
No, jump right on in.
I think that Courtney did an amazing job explaining environmental racism, which is kind of honestly, it's a very hard term to explain. It's so connected to everything else, and it's so ingrained in just the systemic racism in general, but it's kind of its own section of it. And I think a lot of people don't understand racism in general, but then environmental racism is something that a lot of people don't understand. And a couple of things I wanted to take off of what you said is, so one reason why I think people don't understand is it's not always just visible out in the open, because it's not supposed to be, because that's the way we kind of set it up, the way that we don't want to look at trash. Like, no one wants to be living next to the landfill. No one wants to be living next to the waste or the pollution, the air pollution, or like the gross rivers that we throw all of our pollution into. No one wants that. So we put it into the areas that we had already designated as less important and less money goes there, because there was no investment in like Black people and people of color communities and neighborhoods. So put it over there and hide it. And I think that's what a lot of environmental damage already is. Like, we hide it because we don't want to see it, but that's more of a problem because it's going to build up over time, and it just elongates the problem, and it's already harming people, and people who have already been designated as less important in our system of society, unfortunately. So I think that's one huge part of the problem, is it's like invisibility, which it's so ironic because pollution is not invisible. It's so disgusting and ugly, we don't want to look at it, but we've designated to areas where it's not visible to privileged people a lot of the time. And then I also wanted to talk about how there's such good examples in the city of Dayton already. So talking about Old North Dayton, there are two Superfund sites, which are areas that have been so polluted by industry and so toxic that the EPA has designated there needs to be cleanup, and the Superfund law designates federal funding to help regenerate that area. But if you look in Old North Dayton, the rates of childhood asthma are the highest there, and also rates of disease and cancer are also high in that area. So it's just an example. It's everywhere, but right here in Dayton, as we do work here, it's just so obvious and it's so prevalent. And if you look at our redlining maps, obviously it's just so connected. But there's lots and lots of layers, but I guess I'll stick with that for that question.
No, so I think that invisibility part is so important. I recently watched a 60-minute documentary where there was this town somewhere in Alabama, and there is just all their water is filthy. And because of where it's located, because of who lives there, no one is doing anything about it. And you have people fighting for clean water, fighting for sewage not to be all throughout their houses. And so it's the same thing. Our families here in Dayton could be wondering, why are our children sick? And we're blaming pollen, we're blaming dust, and really it's their proximity to filth and their proximity to pollution. So thank you for pointing that out. So on this topic, there are people who it's not impacting them as much, or so they think. Why should we all care about it? Hey, if it's here and I live here, then why should I care? Because it's not impacting my family or my kids. Why should we all care about environmental justice?
Thanks. Environmental justice has been discussed in concept, right? Since President Clinton issued an executive order on the subject in the mid-1990s. And until recently, it's only been recently that concept has really been translated into any real world impact at all. And so now we have the Justice 40 initiative. We have the Journey to Justice by Administrator Reagan of the EPA. And now the Biden administration has signaled an intention to implement principles of environmental justice across statewide federal actions federally. And so in 2021, in January, President Biden issued that executive order, and it created a White House interagency council. The council, it's notable because it expands the purview of environmental justice concerns beyond just now the EPA. That council now includes attorney generals and secretaries of agriculture, commerce, defense, and the liking. Housing and urban development, especially, is one real big area that's essential to minority communities. But previously, the EPA had solely spearheaded the oversight and incorporation of environmental justice into its agency, and only into agency actions only prior to now. And this expanded the scope of oversight and enforcement of EJ metrics beyond just the EPA. And it also suggests that we now see environmental justice principles implemented in projects, initiatives, enforcement actions across the agencies, but now in areas that are deemed EJ communities. It gives now a strategy to address the historic environmental injustices that have occurred in these communities, and they are notoriously BIPOC communities. And so all these developments really now have a real world impact, and we can start to see some tangible things for these measurements to hold people accountable. But why do we care? Like why, right? Why do we care? If I live in a gray area and you don't, why do I care? Because a sustainable society must also be a just society. And if we're talking locally, nationally, internationally, our existence, there's no planet B, right? The right to safe environmental impact is really a fundamental human right. And so if there's a disproportionate burden in one area to the other, we like to say, not in my backyard. But if it's not okay in mine, why is it okay in theirs? And if we don't have these hazards that affect us, what do we do? So we really just must consider our actions outside of our direct interactions. It doesn't matter if you live there. It doesn't matter if it's on your street. It doesn't matter if it's your air quality. There is no part B. There's no plan B. And if we allow it to happen in Flint, if it can continue to happen in Arizona and Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee, it may be okay when it happens to you. We have to be considerate and consider what if and when it's me.
Yeah, so, sorry, did you want to start showing me where you're talking? Okay, yes, just continuing on with that, I think that just the very simple answer to start off with is, why does environmental justice matter? Because it impacts us all. And I think I was just talking about how there's basically it's not invisible, but we put like a layer over it, so you don't always see it. But in fact, that's just harming us all more when we're tucking away our problems, because any environmental discharge, any pollution, it is harming us all, even though it's harming certain communities and people more significantly and disproportionately. It is harming us all. It's contributing to climate change and carbon emissions and overall damage of our planet, which we're all living on and benefiting from. So it's elongating and deepening this problem. Why that's important is because such deep disparities, when you build such deep disparities, it takes so much more energy and resources and money to remediate them and fill in those holes again and fix it back to how it was before. And when I was thinking about this and how to explain it, I worked at the Dayton Food Bank last summer at the Urban Garden, and they don't actually, so the site of the food bank was an old paper mill company, I believe, and they also created ink. And so the grounds, the soil, we tested the soil, and it is so highly toxic with chemicals that we actually can't plant in the soil. And the thing about plants and vegetation, when you plant it, it provides a lot of nutrients to the soil, right? It actually helps cleanse it. So that's a natural way of fixing the soil, but it was so toxic, and the levels are so toxic that even the plants couldn't fix it over like hundreds of years. I forget, my boss was saying when they tested it, it's like over hundreds of years it wouldn't be fixed. So we couldn't actually plant in the soil and give the food to people because that would be toxic food. It would have chemicals in it, which is crazy to think that we've created that level of toxicity in our own soil, that we can't eat the food that is grown in it. So the food bank uses raised beds on the concrete there, and then uses soil and compost, which we create at the food bank. But anyway, that's one example. It's that, like, so think about it, when we allowed that company to continue to pollute, and there were no regulations, it has created hundreds of years of time and energy, which is a ton of money also to remediate soil like that. That it's so much longer, like, to fix that problem. Whereas had that company start polluting, and then after a year or so we stopped the company, then it would be able to be so much shorter. We would both like working to help fix the soil, like humans, but also like the vegetation and nature takes over. Nature cleanses itself if left alone. And but then waiting for so long until I think it closed down eventually with all the pollution that's built up, it's taken so much longer. And then with that, a layer of our current society and policy is, like, so many companies are still emitting pollution, right? And if we put an end to that, like we put policies to stop the pollution, chances are, because they're so used to it, so used to getting away with it, they're going to continue unless there's like hard forest regulation, or it'll just be really hard. They'll fight back. They'll try to get those regulations removed in a lot of ways and spaces. So my point all here being is that environmental racism affects us all, and it's just creating such longer, like deeper problems that are going to take so much longer, and all of us are going to have to contribute to, because we share this planet and this space, to fix. So that's the reasons why, and I hope that all made sense too. But
no, it made plenty of sense. And basically, from what I hear you all saying, is that the cost is, it costs us tax dollars, it costs us the ability to feed and care for ourselves, it costs us the planet, which we only have one of. There is no plan B, as Courtney has said. So the cost is major with, with the way that we are treating the earth, and with the issues that we are having as it relates to environmental justice. And that's very costly, and it seems like it takes a lot of time to fix it. And so, Eileen, you have shared a lot of examples of some things that's going on in our community. Do you have some more about what else is happening in the Miami Valley as it relates to environmental racism?
Yeah, so I can talk about our own work at Dayton Energy Collaborative. So our whole mission at Dayton Energy Collaborative is to reduce like housing instability, and like connecting that to environmental justice. So our current program, the Home Energy Savings Program that we are piloting this summer, works to reduce energy burdens, which if energy burdens are the percent of household income spent on energy. And energy burdens are higher for low-income households for many reasons, but the first being that most of the time they live in older, dilapidated housing that's highly inefficient. So they're spending more money on it they're not actually reaping the benefits of because it escapes from their house. And with that, in the dilapidated housing, there's typically lots of home repairs and higher presence of lead paint and higher triggers for asthma. So really poor indoor air quality. So just a whole list of things. So that connect with it, which is a great example of how any environmental damage impacts every single aspect of life. It's not just one aspect, it's our entire being. So what we're trying to do is we're partnering with a bunch of different organizations to kind of streamline the process of creating healthy homes and retrofitting homes to be weatherized, be more energy efficient, save money on energy bills, but also make the indoor quality living space comfortable and healthy, and helping hopefully create financial stability while also reducing carbon emissions, because one of the easiest paths to lower emissions is to create energy efficient buildings. So that is one thing that we're doing, our program that we're starting now, and we're hoping to eventually expand into all Dayton neighborhoods because Dayton has very old housing stock that desperately needs to be retrofitted. But we're hoping we are starting in Twin Towers neighborhood and Edgemont, and then going from there, hoping to continue out. And I'll just share that there's approximately 30,000 households that, based on the data that we have about energy burdens, that need to be retrofitted in the Dayton area. So we're going to start small and hopefully get to that number. But yes, that's something that's happening right now.
I just want to attest to the homes being outdated. I just bought a house, and my house was built in 1958, and the windows have not been replaced since 1958. And so now you talk about the cost being put on a regular young couple having to replace all the windows at the pace that we can, that we want to be green, but then we got to have some green to get green, right? And so that's just a real life example of how our housing stock being old and outdated impacts us today. We didn't build the house, but we bought it. So now we have to fix it if we want to be responsible. So yes, I know that is very true, Eileen. Now, Courtney, you are working on the policy side. You told us about EJ community. I'm like taking notes. I'm like, I got a degree in this, but I still need a greater understanding. So can you break it down just a little bit more for those of us who might not be in the policy world, of just an everyday story of what is the work that you are doing, and how is it trickling down to the everyday person?
Sure. EJ work is not easy work. And I'll tell you that the equity perspective is what has grabbed me into environmental justice, right? Knowing that the movement was born out of the movement that preceded, which was the civil rights movement. And not many know that even Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., when he died in Memphis, he was there for the Memphis sanitation workers strike. And so he took the largest and organized the largest environmental justice movement in the country, the first and largest at that time. That perspective has drawn me in. As a scholar of the South, who is from the North, right, the Midwest, it's something that's really never left me. And so now as we're marrying ecology with equity, that perspective presents environmental justice from a larger problem, a problem that speaks to the racial, the social, and the economic injustices that have occurred. And as we start to do this work, it's multi-layered, but the US is now coming from a lens point of there are some systemic inequities, and environmental justice is one of them. And so what that work looks like for me now is making sure that we talk about the influence of politics and race and class on an entire community's quality of life and their well-being. And so that work in that sense is hard work, but that work begins with a community who tells you what their issue is, a community who leads you and says, here's what you can help us understand from the agency orders, the policies, city ordinances that are taking place, things that we need locally change, right? To change the purview in the landscape of environmental justice overall. Because at the core of this, environmental justice issues are really local issues, and they need to be tackled from a local solution place. And it allows now for everyone to kind of see themselves in one fight, right? Environmental justice is that fight that was born and officially in the 60s and 70s. But before that, there were just everyday people who are fighting big business and big corporations. So it gives power back to people. And from the government standpoint, it is allowing communities to say, here's our problem. And now government, here's what you do. And instead of coming from a top down, we're working from the bottom up. And at the core of that is what will sustain real change for communities at a local level.
Okay. So what can we do? What can I do? What can I do? Tell me what to do. How do I get in the fight? How do I get in this work?
I can just start saying, I think that there's so much value in learning, and I think that people learn in different ways, but and get passion by their learning in different ways. But one thing that really has kind of opened, when you learn something and you're able to see it in a new perspective and be able to visualize it. For once, I think that one of the things with environmental justice, as I've talked about, is it's really hard if you're in certain spaces to kind of understand and comprehend all the layers and really understand what's going on. But so that Undesign the Red Line exhibit that is in Dayton at the Dayton Metro Libraries is one exhibit that I wish everyone would go and see. And I think that it's a start. I think that being able to understand what's going on around us is kind of the best first step in this fight, in my opinion. And I think that exhibit, more than anything that I've read, as I studied in college a lot about environmental justice and environmentalism and then social justice, and those two combined, was like this exhibit kind of just helped me visualize and understand really, like, we talk about systemic racism, but this like shows it in the maps that the exhibit has. And you can also see redlining maps online as well. But being able to visualize, it's okay, so this is what we created policies to disinvest in these areas, these traditionally colored neighborhoods areas. And now look at the map today of the highest levels of poverty, and look at the maps today of where there's high levels of pollution. And they align perfectly with those maps from when we created those redlining policies. And I think that kind of helps you visualize and understand what we're dealing with, and how, even though redlining is no longer allowed, that technically it still continues, and those kind of policies and practices still continue. And for me, that's just such a good start to understanding really what is occurring and the culture around it, and like, because it is so normalized in so many ways. So wrapping your head around it, I recommend being like doing that, going to that exhibit and learning more about redlining in that way. But it is just a start. But I think that's what I'll end with right there.
I think you are incredibly right. If we're talking about redlining and inequities that have been man-made, those systems and structures that have lend itself to Dayton, Ohio, being one of the most food apartheid regions in the nation, right? And it's not being food insecure. Apartheid is not having the access to healthy foods. So we have an abundance of things that really redlining has shaped. in the city of Dayton. And so I would just say that what do we do in a moment of really reckoning and reflection about our racial inequity in the country as well, not just the city of Dayton. We are really a mirror, a local mirror for a major problem that is happening across the nation in urban areas, right? And so it's just time to be forthright about the inequalities and the rapid expanding business of clean energy, and ensuring that our communities that we're providing and businesses are providing economic opportunities, but the benefits, ensuring that they're fairly distributed across races and income levels. I urge our people to educate yourselves, right? Everyday people, ordinary men and women have led and started the movement for environmental justice. And that is exactly where the power needs to lie to correct some of those power imbalances in this fight. Educate yourself and don't be afraid of the knowledge. People say, oh my gosh, I'm not in STEM. I have no idea about that. I come out of liberal arts, but guess what? We are all here together. And that is exactly what this movement has done, by all people from all walks of life, all colors, all creeds, all religions together to say that we don't have a planet B. We may want to take care of A together. Secondly, I would hold our representatives accountable. Listen, examine the role that individual citizens play and that we can play in dismantling structural racism and at a local level. And when your leaders, when our leaders are not being intentional, act. We act to hold them accountable and also big business accountable. And then lastly, don't forget the origins of this movement. Again, long before the terms environmental racism, environmental degradation, or environmental justice were coined, everyday men and women who are really just sick and tired of being sick and tired, they got together and confronted decision makers who controlled their environment. And so now the power has to lie, and the government is even acknowledging that it lies with the people. They organize efforts. And so I would just urge all of us to continue that legacy, because environmental policy and impact, they have always gone hand in hand to move us forward. Do something.
I want to add to that really quick, because you brought up such a good point, Courtney, and it reminded me. Environmentalism and environmental action, like sometimes people are intimidated by that and they think that the job that they, and the lifestyle that they have can't contribute. However, I'm constantly saying environmentalism, because it touches every area of life, we need people fighting in every single job, every single space. And that can be if you're working for a corporation, a business, and that can be if you're a student, that can be if you're an artist, it can be if you're an engineer or a data analysis. We need people in every single area because it's so ingrained in everything. And that's even better, because I think that you can take that passion and bring it into your space that doesn't traditionally have a view of sustainability. That's so much better. And we need just impassioned people everywhere in every single job. And it's just a starting that mindset, leading by example, and wherever you're at, whatever community and area you're at, or whatever job you have, starting there is exactly what we need. Actually, it's not small. That's exactly what we need. Starting to kind of shift that culture wherever you are right now is exactly what we need to expand environmentalism and knowledge of sustainability, and to battle the climate crisis, in my opinion.
So one thing came to mind as you was talking, Eileen, was the movie Fern Gully. I know that probably sounds so random. Do you all remember that movie? Am I the only one? Kind of, sort of. So it was a movie about, okay, I'm obviously a nerd, but it was a children's movie. And it was about saving the rainforest. And it was about fairies who were in the forest and the trees were being cut down. And they had this big black, red X on all the trees. And there was a machine, which they saw as a monster, that was coming to tear the trees down. And so there was a man who was in charge, or who was on the project, and they shrunk him so that he could see the impact of what he was doing. But the reason why, and so the movie ends where he messes the machine up, right, and saves the rainforest. And at the end, I think I've rewatched it as an adult. The movie was made by an environmental justice group. It wasn't, but they created film and media. And to this day, that was probably made in the 80s or 90s. that like I remember that, and I remember caring about the rainforest. So when you talk about everybody has a role, and we can spread the message to like to our children as well. We have an audience question here. They want to know, when did you know that you wanted to focus your work or your volunteering on environmental justice? Was there a specific moment or occurrence that sparked it?
Wow. That's good reflection. That is so necessary. When did I know? Wow. I have always been heavily influenced by Julian Bond. Julian Bond is the co-founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And when I went to college, I knew that I was going to historically Black college. It wasn't where, it really was just where and which one, right, for me. And I was, as being a child, I grew up in Stiver School of the Performing Arts here in Dayton, Ohio. And I've always been a mouthpiece. That may be good or bad for my family, but I've been a mouthpiece. And as I began speaking to religious power, speaking truth to power, that led me to the South. And when I was able to get in my dorm room, my parents left me on campus. And the address of Jackson State University, which is the first research one historically Black college in the nation, says that they left me at 1400 J.R. Lynch Street. And the movie of the day was Mississippi Burning. And it was one thing to watch that and have grown up and watching and having that African and really that pride experience here in Ohio. But it was different sitting in Jackson, Mississippi, watching Mississippi Burning. And then going to class on Monday morning and seeing the same actors and actresses then be my professors. And so going through that 4-year experience again for me really was a clarion call that I don't have the option, I have the obligation to continue this work. And it is making sure that my mouthpiece continues to speak truth to power and continues to empower people to speak for themselves. And so for me, I would say that I was fired up by being educated at 1400 J.R. Lynch Street. And that led me to DC. Congressman Benny Thompson is an alum of Jackson State University. And as a student government professional, he said, you need to be in DC over here. And that's exactly what I did. And so working in Homeland Security gave me the opportunity to see converging effects that happen in climate, like when Hurricane Katrina hit. I was in college in the South, and then I got to work in the policy part of Hurricane Katrina, fighting for Black farmers' rights who did not get the equal funding after the hurricane damaged their crops as well. And so I became fired up on 1400 Lynch Street, and now it's just my obligation to find myself in the fight and do something.
My story goes back to just when I was little. I think that I've always felt happiest and most at home outside, outdoors, in nature. And I just, from that, had a great deep respect from it and never understood why people would pollute it or do anything. I was just so confused by that, and also just feeling so close to nature. And then that combined in high school, learning about social justice and Catholic social teaching at my high school. I felt so connected to it. I'm like, this makes so much sense, this social justice principles. And I was like, this is what I want. This is what I need to be fighting for. Like, I know that this is what I'm meant to do. And then I remember my junior research paper I was writing on implementing a carbon tax. And my friend, who is also similarly, she was writing on environmental justice. And that was the first time I heard that term, environmental justice. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. That line and intersection of work, I just felt so immediately called towards. And then my senior year of high school, I took AP Environmental Science, and that learning about everything, climate change, I had, of course, known about, but learning about it very scientifically and learning about it at the scale and everything connecting to it, I knew that I could not continue into college and not study something related to sustainability or environmental science. And I didn't initially. I wanted to do social work or something along those lines. But I knew I had to do it because I just felt too connected to it. So I ended up studying sociology and did a sustainability minor, but that combination is exactly what it is, because I studied environmental justice, and I took the classes. When I was able to choose, I took the ones that exactly aligned with my passions of environmental justice. So from there, I knew that that's what the work I wanted to do. And I think also I went to University of Dayton and continually feeling more connected and falling in love with the city, but also seeing exactly what has happened is a prime example of environmental injustice and how the policies and culture that have been created in our country has left a Rust Belt city in the Midwest. It's a very classic example, and I knew that, knowing that and feeling so connected to this community and meeting more people, I knew I wanted to stay and work here on these issues that are it's just an example of every other city, especially Midwestern Rust Belt cities, post-industrial cities right now. So that's how I started, and we'll just continue on this work for the rest of my life for sure.
These stories are so inspiring, and it just brings the reality home. Our generation has to respond to the past and what's left, the legacy of it, both good and bad. And also your stories pointed out, I think, how we need to have more young people learning about environment. I feel like we need an environmental justice camp. So I'm putting that out there for the YW to pick up, so that we can have some girls doing this work coming out of the Miami Valley, right? Because you all were young, right? In college and in high school, I believe, where you were touched. So the future can be changed if we engage our young folks in the work. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. There was another question that the attendees have. They want to know, what do you believe is the most common misconception about environmental justice or environmental racism?
Okay, I'll go. I was waiting. Aileen, go ahead and go.
I was still thinking as well, but I think that, I don't know if it's exactly misconception, but talking a little bit more about just understanding really the depth and the layers of environmental injustice, that it's not just even pollution, but it's lack of green spaces in areas that are traditionally communities of color. And then also just connecting to the health disparities, there's higher rates of diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular diseases, and then of course anything respiratory, especially asthma and everything along those lines. But in addition to that, you take that and there's higher levels of stress, because one thing green spaces contribute to well-being, greater well-being. It's highly researched that presence of green spaces and outdoor spaces help our mentality and our well-being. And so when you're not always exposed to green spaces, parks, what have you, that's going to impact that. And then, of course, the layers of poverty or low income, and then the health disparities, dealing with health, poor health, and bills, and all of that contributes to stress and generational stress. And that's all a part of environmental injustice. And it's also highly researched that people in these communities have generational stress. And what that is you can physically pass down stress to your children in utero, and then they have higher levels of stress exposed to that as they go through their lives. And then if you're continually exposed to this environment with no places to go outside, or it's all polluted, and little access to parks and green spaces to be physically active, and then there's also no grocery stores nearby, or there's very poor food options, there's there's so many layers of that. And then one other thing, last thing I'll say on that is there's also lots of research to say that green spaces contribute to greater social cohesion, which is so important as human beings. Human connection is just proven to be so integral in us. Whether you're introvert or extrovert, you need human connection, and people and communities are, when they're so close, people are happier, people feel stronger, more motivated. But when you have all these issues that I've just mentioned, you have lesser social cohesion, and many times, not all the time, but that just contributes to the layers of environmental justice, and it just goes on and on and on. And I think that just goes to speak to how deep it is and how much we have to learn to understand about it.
Quickly, yeah, it is so multi-layered, right? I mean, like it's huge. But I think one misconception is that our leadership and power structures will inherently advocate for what is good, true, and possible about our health. And that is not. I think another huge misconception is that the homes we live in and the places that even our children attend school, that they're safe. That is a huge misconception. For example, in Philadelphia, there is a 75-year backlog. They're doing a report with the teachers union to talk about the 75-year backlog that will cost over $200 million to remediate and take care of mold, asbestos, lead poisoning in the schools. If there is a 75-year backlog, that means that there are 75 generations of children who have a gift that will keep on giving, that will damage their bodies and are and have in some way. And so now it is up to teachers federations and then citizens to get involved, because government and big business hide reports and they hide truth, in fact, from public, because it looks bad. It's not responsible and it's not good management. And so I think building upon that misconception is just that understanding that the homes we live in, the materials that build environments that we are frequently in, especially when we talk about healthy homes and healthy schools and healthy communities, is not always so. And there are environmental hazards that if we don't get involved at some level, if it's just that you're a parent and you're concerned about the environment and the well-being of your child, get involved. If it's that you're a school leader and you have no children, but you're there in that environment and you're concerned about the well-being of your life, get involved. If it's a groundskeeper, get involved. Because there is truth and power needs to meet together to solve a lot of those inequities and those things that we don't really think are true, but they really are. And it begins in our homes, environments, and definitely schools.
Well, they told us, right? So it is time for all of us to get involved, and we each can participate and really help move the needle as it relates to environmental justice. I really appreciate how you all really brought this so local and so personal and brought it into the walls of our home that we can do something about it. Because when you hear it, it feels like you can't touch it. Like there's no way that I can do something about this. It's just a big issue. You hear climate change and we think, well, it's for like it's forgone, right? Well, it's too late. The earth gonna just end one day, but there's some things that we can do right now today that will have an impact for generations. And so I am so grateful from learning from you two today. I am like, Eileen, you have my dream. I want us to make Dayton green. So I want us to reforest Dayton. The population shrinking. Let's plant some trees.
Yeah.
Let's plant some flowers, right? And I can see now Donna's ready to just jump on and let us know how we can engage with in this work with the YW. But as we transition to Donna, let's give Courtney and Eileen all the claps and all the snaps for making it clear about the work that we need to do in our community. So thank you, ladies, so much.
Wow. Thank you again. I want to echo what Charmaine said. Thank you so much for your powerful and well-informed voice on this topic. What a wonderful way to start our series. So we thank you and we're grateful that you've given your time to us and the community at large today. So Thank you so much. How to get involved. If you want to volunteer with YWCA Dayton, please go to ywcadayton.org/volunteer. If you want to know about any of the events that we have, same URL, ywcadayton.org/events. And just for general support, recommendations, please go to ywcadayton.org/help. Always for any awareness items to see what's going on with YWCA, connect with any of our social media sites, and we are at YWCA Dayton. Thank you again to the panelists, and thank you for everyone that joined us today. Please stay tuned for our next conversation that will happen this Wednesday at noon. Thank you, and have a fantastic day.